wherever you may be. Good evening. My name is Ian McKechnie. I've got the delightful task of hosting this webinar this afternoon on cooling as a service. We have got some very distinguished speakers with us today. We're going to spend the next hour probing the topic of cooling as a service and listening to the experts share their engagement with industry and also the academic rigor that sits behind it. So in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to give you a little bit of context setting about the heating, ventilation and air conditioning sector and the role of servitization. We're going to give some cooling as a service examples from Dimitri Karamitsos and also Dr. Jonas Hildebrand. And Parikshit Naik, Dr. Parikshit will lead the Q&A session as we go through the rest of the slides and the afternoon, and I will then close. The speakers we've got today, if I go through them just in order that you can see them on the screen. Dr. Parikshit Naik is the Commercial Director for the Advanced Services Group, UK-based company, but he's a servitization champion and an expert in X as a service business models. His PhD was in the use of servitization and Internet of Things. We also have Dr. Jonas Hildebrand, who's the Business Development Director from Danfoss Climate Solutions. Jonas is Director of the Business Development area within Danfoss Climate, but also was previously Strategy Director in Danfoss for their cooling segment. And we are delighted to have Dimitri Karamitsos with us. Dimitri has worked with the Advanced Services Group for many years now. He has an engineering background, as do all the speakers today, and is currently involved in the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, based in Switzerland. He is the Energy Transition and Sustainable Tech lead within the group, but in the past has worked with GE on their gas power systems. And he was also instrumental in setting up the Servitization Energy Transition Alliance, which he will talk about later on. So I will just give you a little bit of context to the Advanced Services Group. We are a Centre of Excellence in research and practice on the topic of servitization. We're led by our Executive Director, Professor Tim Baines, who's the #1 cited academic in the world for the topic of servitization. And he's the author of more than 200 publications, including the 2013 book called Made to Serve, which depicted a number of case studies showing firms generating in excess of 50% of their revenues through services. Tim has a new book in the pipeline, and that will come out in early 2024. The wider group, we're based at Aston Business School in Birmingham in the UK. We're focused exclusively on servitization and advanced services. We provide education, training, research for a global network of like-minded individuals. And Parikshit, representing the Advanced Services Group Limited, is the vehicle for where the research and the intellectual property that's created is then shared with industry. Some of the companies we've worked with over the last 12 or so years, you'll see there are some well-known names, some large global organizations, some small firms employing tens of people. The thing that's critical is that all the models, frameworks and tools that we create from the academic context are applicable to all of these businesses. And Parikshit, I will hand over to you at this point to give us a bit more insight and a bit background on the white paper that you had created previously. So over to you.
Thanks, Ian. And thank you everyone for joining us from all around the world. We just got an update from Christina, who's making sure all of this runs properly, that we have people from over 25 countries attending this, wanting to know more about cooling as a service and the X as a service business models. So to give you an idea of why we are talking about this topic, this is the second time we are running a webinar, a session specifically on X as a service in the HVAC industry, or servitization in the HVAC industry. HVAC being, for those not familiar with the term, heating, ventilation and air conditioning industry. And the last time we spoke, we had more of a flavor on the heating as a service side. And today we are going to focus a bit more on the cooling as a service side. Most of you are quite familiar with the frameworks and the way we understand servitization, but of course we have some new names joining us today. So for those, just to give you an idea of how we see the world of servitization and what we mean by advanced services or these as a service models. You will see on your screen that there are 3 levels of services separated by 3 different colors. If you look at the bottom step where you have the orange services, these are what we call base services, where you are focusing on the outcome of product provision. You deliver the product and you deliver some spare parts and consumables and ancillaries that come with the product. Then you look at intermediate services, where you start delivering the outcome of condition of a product. So if something goes wrong, you fix it. If you want to provide an assured maintenance, you provide that. For example, if something goes wrong with my machine, can you, my manufacturer or supplier, guarantee that you will be there in 48 hours to get it up and running? And then you start moving up to a more interesting space of performance advisory and so on. Performance advisory being how can you as the product supplier, whether manufacturer, whether distributor, doesn't matter, but how can you as a product supplier help the customer extract maximum value out of the product? How can you help them be more successful by using the product in a better way? These are still intermediate services. And we have seen in the HVAC industry, these base and intermediate services are quite established. The top 3 levels are where we think of advanced services or more outcome-based services. This is an area where you start guaranteeing the outcome of the product or the outcome of the process in which the product sits or the outcome of the business platform itself. So the customer's business platform. And the process of going from the bottom to the top or from any step lower to any step higher up in the staircase is what we call servitization. And of course, as you go higher up, you create more value, but you start also absorbing more risk in order to gain competitive advantage. So just to set the scene of what we mean by servitization and advanced services. And on the next slide, if somebody can move that for me. Thank you. Just to give you also an idea of what is and what is not heat as a service or cooling as a service. It is not that these are not at all the examples. What we see on the left-hand side are some of the key building blocks of cooling as a service or any outcome-based service. On the right-hand side is how we see a true as a service business model. It is made up of a customer value proposition. It is made up of a delivery system that helps you deliver the value you promise. It is made up of a revenue model on the bottom left that helps you capture the value back into your organization. And as a result, you gain a competitive advantage, which is the bottom right-hand side. What you see as the snapshots here on the screen, you see some maintenance plans, say bronze, silver, gold. These are what we would consider as maintenance services, which are necessary for an as-a-service outcome-based service, but they are not only an outcome-based service. They are not the example of it. Then you also see finance deals. This is a very common misconception in the industry we come across, that businesses confuse a leasing or a financing model with an outcome-based service. You are not really adding a lot more value by taking away the financial pains. Of course, you're taking away the pains, but what are you adding as gains? And that is where the balance comes in place. Is a leasing is a revenue model, financing is a revenue model. It is not a value proposition, it's not added value. And the similar conversation with digital technology, with connected assets. They are necessary to enable outcome-based services, but they are not the outcome-based service. They are an important component. So we see these as essential building blocks, but that's what they are. They are the building blocks, but they are not the service in itself. And based on that, we conducted some research, and the first webinar that we had as well focused on heating as a service. As a result of this, you will have access to our white paper on the HVAC industry perspective and how servitization fits here. In this white paper, we specifically focus on those three challenges: on energy crisis, on stakeholder education, and decarbonization, and how servitization plays a role in helping businesses tackle these challenges. In today's session, you will hear from Demetrius from the several projects that BASE have done on cooling as a service and other energy as a service models as well, and the experiences from it, and from Jonas with Danfoss having put this in market already. And we will hear more on new challenges from their side. We've been exploring contracting and financing, the question of pricing, and of course, the question of utility supply, whether cooling as a service and heating as a service must have a utility supply built into it. So I'll hand over at this point to my fellow presenters, and starting with Dimitris, to tell us a bit more about what he can tell us on cooling as a service.
Many thanks, Parikshit, and thanks as well to the entire team of Advanced Services Group for inviting me today to this great webinar. I think it's a very important topic to tackle into, and as we grow, let's say, our experience in mainstreaming this model across markets, regions, and industries, we always come up with new challenges and new learnings and pitfalls to avoid. So I'll try to give kind of an overview a little bit of our work in this model, and also try to jump quickly into examples before handing over to Jonas. So we can jump on the next slide. I don't know if I have control actually. No. Great. So very briefly, first, like a few words about the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy for the entire audience to know. So we are a nonprofit. We were founded about 22 years ago by the city of Basel and the government of Switzerland. And we are also a specialized collaborative center of the UN Environment Program. And what we focus on has been for the past 22 years to design innovative business models and financial mechanisms that help accelerate investments in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate-driven solutions. So we really we're not a financier, we're not a technology provider, but we work in between the different stakeholders to create mechanisms that function and that create sustainable economical growth, but also social impact, and as well, of course, climate impact. So why do we do this? This is kind of the purpose of BASE, right? So we know that by 2050, actually energy usage is planned to increase by 50% worldwide. And if we want to reach our 1.5 degrees target, we actually need to invest more than 2.4 trillion US dollars annually within applications, climate solutions across sectors. And actually what we see as well is that we need actually to increase 5 times the amount of investments in low carbon energy efficiency solutions to meet this target. So there's a substantial amount of efforts being done, knowing that last year, I think we managed to reach the 1 billion of investments only, and 90% of that was actually in China. So there is a lot of work to be done in Europe and also elsewhere across markets. We can go to the next slide. So in a nutshell, I mentioned we work, of course, closely with the private sector, but we work also with entities such as the UN Environment Program, the IDB, so development banks, private equity funds, but also associations and other nonprofits such as the World Green Building Council, because the purpose is to try really to reach out as much as we can to the market out there and to as many stakeholders as we can. So this is just a little bit of a topic of the different areas we tackle in. And one which is of particular importance for us nowadays is also circular economy. And here you have a map of the different regions where we have activity happening. And actually, quite a few years back now, it goes 7 years ago, we started to focus quite a bit in the cooling sector. And why is this? It's because we realize that the cooling sector is an industry that is massively growing across the world, and it's estimated to triple in energy consumption by 2050. So from one perspective, this represents a massive opportunity financially of more than 6.9 trillion US dollars over the next 30 years. However, that also represents a huge risk on the climate and also on the grid, because all of those technologies consume a lot of energy. And what we see, according actually to the IEA, is that more than I think 2/3 of the markets engage with systems that are in general less than 60% less efficient than the best technologies they have access to their respective markets. And this, even though what we know is that energy efficiency, especially in cooling, is bringing really strong advantages to customers. So actually, the upfront investment cost is just a tiny portion of the total cost of ownership of such equipments, which last between 15 to 20 years. And the reason behind this is through the different activities we've seen across the markets, and this is data also that the ASG has shared previously, so I'll run quickly through it, is customers are very kind of sensitive to the upfront investment costs of such technologies, but also it's connected to the performance of those technologies. So what is my ROI as a customer if I invest in such a technology? And as well, it's connected to risk in such technologies. So if it's a system that is less known, are there supply chain risks? How is the maintenance happening? What are some of the hidden costs in such systems? So therefore, there is a large amount of customers that are lagging behind to engage with better technologies on the market. And so we saw here a strong opportunity to deploy the model of servitization. And I don't need to go into the details of this. You all know the example of Rolls-Royce that deployed this model on their aircraft engines. So it's not a new model. And that's the beauty of it as well, is that we see that it has extremely high potential in systems that consume a lot of energy. And today we're focusing on cooling, but actually it's applicable with heating, with lighting, with transport. And at BASE, we launched like various initiatives. Like one of them was the Cooling as a Service initiative, but there has also been the Efficiency as a Service initiative, where ASG has also been involved. And also we launched the SET Alliance, which is a global alliance that tries to combine all of the players that have experience in this model within one group or network of entities to try to mainstream this model forward. So I don't need to explain what the model is, but in a nutshell, is shifting to a recurrent payment process for a customer instead of charging them upfront for the investment. And as well, the important part also to know is that there are solutions to invest into the asset for solution providers that are interested to deploy this without, let's say, going through the burden of bearing themselves as well the investment requirements. So they can partner with financiers, and this is something we will look into in a second in the later slides. But in the activities we did across markets, one of the key things we were always looking to learn, and we still do that nowadays, it's to understand the profile and the needs of the users on one side, the solution providers, and the financiers. And today we keep learning on this. So just to say, like in a nutshell, some of the advantages of the different players, we very well know for the customers, it's often the upfront capital investment, etc. But depending, for instance, on the customer that you approach, and I won't read the bullet points one by one, I think you will have access to the slides later on. But also, for instance, if you look at the public sector, it's sometimes debt ceiling. So sometimes the public sector, for instance, has already spent the amount of investment that they need in retrofits or in investments that they need to do, but they still need to reach their climate targets. And therefore, approaching them on a cooling as a service approach allows them to engage on solutions that consume less energy and that are better for the climate without having to do the investment, and being able to leapfrog to technologies within the same year without like having the need to wait for the next year or the year after to do that engagement. And other customers sometimes that have actually the cash available to purchase the technology, it's also from a complexity of technology. So nowadays we're getting more and more complex on digitalization, on how to control systems, on how to also reach targets on climate, and having the opportunity to outsource this to an entity that has the expertise is extremely valuable. And then one last point is also, we all know that granting, let's say, budgets within companies, especially big companies, takes a lot of time, sometimes 12 to 18 months. And having the capability to engage on a cooling as a service contract allows you to bypass this as a company. And therefore, again, if you have climate targets to reach, you can do that with a partner and hopefully reach out those targets very quickly. Then for technology providers, it's for me really like bridging innovation and R&D closer to market and having the opportunity also to deploy the full potential of the technology. So having the knowledge on the total cost of ownership of a system and having the control also on the efficiency allows you really to optimize the operations of the system and deliver especially further value to the customer. And there, what is interesting, it's basically you're creating a market barrier for technologies that are cheaper to buy because you are basically offering a better price to the customer. Because the more, let's say, you're efficient and the better your total cost of ownership is, the better your price, let's say, per usage is going to be for your customer. And then finally, for the investors, is an opportunity to deploy green financing, but also very importantly to decarbonize your scope 3 activities, and also to invest into projects that down the road have the potential to become also circular. So this is also something that we see in the staircase of the advanced services group, is if you go full scale into doing as a service, you also have actually incentives from a business perspective to be circular. And now we jump quickly into the project examples. And Parikshit, don't hesitate to make a sign in case I have. All right, I have still time. Great, it's a little bit small, but you'll have the slides afterwards. I think the font has been adapted a little bit. So here, the first example is from a partner of ours called CARE. They're based in Singapore, and they have activities in Singapore, but also in India, Malaysia, and they're growing across Southeast Asia. And this example here is in India with a customer that has a large real estate complex that initially was using a cooling system for quite some years and needed a retrofit, and they didn't know what to buy. So they were hesitant on performance, on risk, etc. And as well, they were hesitant on whether or not they should deploy solar energy to power this system, because according to their experience, it was actually really hard to have the capacity to power a system fully with solar energy, just from the experience that they had systems before that was using quite a bit of energy. And here, CARE proposed two contracts to the customer, one cooling as a service and the other one a PPA contract with solar energy. And they retrofitted the customer without the need of doing any upfront investment, and they embedded the price of electricity to the customer for the consumption of cooling for the different activities within the building. And so initially they were estimated to have 20% energy efficiency for the customer. And I think today they're measuring 35%. So they actually deployed also a digital solution that they created, or let's say developed afterwards. But since they had the ownership of the asset, they could embed it easily within the system. And they further improved, let's say, the energy efficiency of the system. Here is a second example, and I run quickly through it, from Energy Partners in South Africa, who's a solution provider that deploys ammonia refrigeration plants, but also solutions on solar energy and also steam as a service. And this particular example, so the customer as well had to retrofit their plant, and Energy Partners allowed them to do so on a refrigeration as a service contract. And the purpose of the customer was not so much that they didn't have the CapEx, but they were more and more, let's say, not afraid, but skeptical on having the knowledge in-house to maintain, repair, and operate ammonia plants. We are quite complex in designs and also can be riskier to maintain. And therefore, it was extremely valuable to kind of outsource this to Energy Partners, who also deployed solar energy on top of the customer roofs to power the systems. And here, the energy improvements were of 20%. And I think annually they're saving about 1,200 CO2 equivalent or related to energy savings. And here it's the same supplier, but it's a project I like to share because it gives a perspective that the two suppliers that you've seen now, CARE and Energy Partners, are going more and more to also larger applications. So here actually is a retrofit and consolidation project for a dairy factory in South Africa of 10 megawatt. So the value of the investment is actually 8.8 million euros. So it's quite of a big investment. And also it was quite risky for energy partners to deploy this. So initially they were estimating to provide energy improvements of 30% for the customer. And after a few months of operations, they were actually measuring 40%. So they overachieved for the performance of the customer, which also from their side, beyond being a success, it was also bringing like value to the customer that otherwise would not have been achievable. Because typically customers, as we know, when they purchase systems, they also have to purchase a larger amount of equipment to account for variability in usage. So whether you have very hot days, you have to account in the scenario that you might need more cooling. So you end up actually having more assets on the ground, and these typically end up being sometimes, unfortunately, stranded assets, and they lag down into the ROI for the customer when they purchase the technology. And here as well, so I think the greenhouse gas reductions were of 2,100 tons thanks to the solar energy, and then the efficiency gains and the hot water recovery also from the plant enabled for 4,470 tons a year. And an aspect that is interesting to mention for these two companies that you saw, Care and Energy Partners, they were initially distributors, then they were into energy performance contracts, and then they saw the value into going into full as a service. So they went through also a journey that took time for them, but it also enabled them to understand the business model, to understand their customers, and to understand the value in deploying this on the markets. And here is the last example in Colombia, with another group, which is MGM Innova Group, which is a private equity fund that deployed cooling as a service in offices. And one of the particularities of this of the contracts here is that it was done kind of like a tenant contract with the offices, whereby if a renter would move out of an office, he would have a 6 months notice to find another renter, and if he would not, let's say, do that, there would be penalties in the contract. And I'm looking at time. I'm just asking Parikshit, how much time do you have? I'm good. Perfect. I'll just share a few of the learnings on the different projects that we see and the difficulties and the challenges that we mentioned on contracting, pricing, financing, and whether or not you can or you should include, let's say, utilities into your offering. On the contracting and pricing side, we see always the challenge that always pops up with regards to the topic of IFRS 16 and 15. So how do you make sure that this is a contract that is off balance from your customer so that your customer can benefit from that, but also yourself? And there is very much correlation as well with the pricing. How do you price that system to your customer? How do you define also the in the contract the different assets? Like, do you define the assets that you provide to the customer in your contract, or do you provide it like a little bit like blurry? What are some of the best practices there in the benefit of the customer, but also in the benefit of the contract long term? And connected to that as well, what we see as a challenge is always the clauses for contract termination. So how do you define this? Should you include it? So what we see typically is that it's good if the customer requests for it to definitely include it, not to object to it, because it offers an opportunity to build trust for the customer, to engage on a cooling as a service contract, and whether they decide to terminate the contract or to purchase the technology at any time, they can actually have the option, the financial option to do that. And it allows them to jump into trying out this new business model and seeing what's the value for them into that. So, and for providers, it gives also a time to prove case that this is the right approach for the customer to go into. Then one area that we also see is kind of always varying is the units of pricing that you can provide to the customer. So for instance, one example is dollars per tonnage of refrigeration per hour, but there are a variety of different examples. So for instance, we saw the example of an airport being charged per passenger passing through the airport. So it's always about seeing the value that there is to the customer and trying to fit your business case to the business case of the customer. And then other aspects that are important to include into the pricing of the contracting, if you include, for instance, the price of electricity, it's that the electricity is indexed, so you don't bear the risk of electricity towards the service that you provide to the end customer, and also inflation. So this is inflation in contracts is always in terms of negotiation. So you need to negotiate that with the customer and to see what are the best ways to define that into the contract so that you're protected as well as a supplier. And then very importantly, depending on the contract, on the countries, it's access rights to the technology. So those, some countries are more, let's say, picky on access rights, and it's connected again to IFRS 16 regulations. So that always we recommend to have a professional accountant sharing some of the rules in the country, because it always varies. And all of those are affecting actually, I mean, not the last one, but especially on the pricing one, the swallow the fish principle. So how much are you able from a solution provider to go through that path of negative cash flows before you start again growing? And that's a topic, there is a lot of research on this and publications, so it's definitely worth reading those when you jump on board of deploying such models. And then on the financing side, yeah.
Dimitris, sorry. Yeah, 1 minute.
Super, thank you, Parikshit. So on the financing side, I would say you have a variety of options, but what is interesting there is that you have actually structures that can help you to finance the deployment of such projects, and you have to find the right financial partners. So what we see also in the market is that terms and conditions across financial partners can vary a lot. So definitely worth to spend the time to build a partnership with financiers. And then if we look at utilities, there it changes a lot as well, depending if you are a stock listed company as well. So sometimes it can impact your return on sales. So you need to have the shareholders supporting this approach. And in some countries, you need to have a license to become a utility, actually, if you embed the price of electricity into your offering. So in general, but we see opportunities in many countries to actually deploy solar energy, and always we see ways to include the price of electricity to your customer. So there are ways around that. So anyway, I'll pause here, and Parikshit, I'll hand over the microphone to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. I think we are seeing some questions come in already, so we'll draw upon more of your bullet points later on. And I think at this point we can hand over to Jonas. Jonas, just to check, you have control of the slides as well?
Let me see.
Yep.
Yes, I seem to have. Hi,
Perfect.
everyone. Also from my side, thanks Dimitris for giving this comprehensive introduction into the concept of cooling as a service. Today, I would love to go into one specific business that we have established at Danfoss, and I'll do that in 3 parts. One is I'll give a short introduction to everyone about Danfoss, who we are, then share what we have done and why we've done it, and then lastly, some reflections on what we have learned so far. Starting with Danfoss. Danfoss is a Danish-based technology company, which has actually in the last years grown to quite a, from my point of view, large size. So roughly 10 billion euros of revenue, operating worldwide and employing more than 40,000 people. The 3 segments that Danfoss is supplying with components and solutions might look strange, might look not too unified, but the thing that unites them all is one, it's high tech, right? So it's a real engineering effort to compete in these markets. And the second one, most importantly, is that all the Danfoss solutions they pay into improving energy efficiency as a means to decarbonization. 3 segments are Danfoss Power Solutions, where Danfoss is providing solutions and components for mainly hydraulic and also electrified systems in agricultural and construction machines. Secondly, on the right side, Danfoss Power Electronics and Drives, This is where Danfoss is providing frequency converters. So one of the main means for reducing energy consumption in many electric systems. And then the third one, where I'm also working for, is Danfoss Climate Solutions, where we provide components, control systems, and services solutions for heating and cooling applications. Why is that? Why is that important? Because the breadth of the portfolio that Danfoss has, if you look at a refrigeration cycle, is quite huge. So we basically cover the entire cycle with our components, and then we say the differentiation that we also get the feedback from the market that we bring is basically that system knowledge, that application knowledge from generating, distributing energy, cold or hot, integrating it, and then doing the control about it. And seeing that as a starting point, we have of course in our processes made up our mind, okay, how can we bring that value to the customer, right? That deep understanding of the different applications, be it heat pumps, be it AC in commercial buildings, refrigeration systems in food retail, in food processing, and so on. And one of the initiatives that came out of that is actually that we have developed a refrigeration as a service solution, which is exactly as Dimitris and also Parikshit gave that introduction, where we are taking responsibility for entire systems in supermarkets along or across the entire life cycle of the system. So from designing and engineering them to installing them, running them, and optimizing them across the entire life cycle. This is the responsibility that this offering that we, together with a partner, I'll come to it in a minute, take over. Why have we selected to do this in the food retail, refrigeration and HVAC space? Because we see exactly those challenges that Dimitris had. I think you had a very long list. I just name a couple of them that really apply to the segment that we are in. There is a super high investment need to transition the refrigeration systems to modern systems that are based on natural refrigerants, mostly CO2 when we talk about larger stores. This technology is more complex and also has high investment needs, and there's a large installed base at many retailers. So there is a need for investment and for quick investment if we look at also the regulatory environment, at least in Europe, but also in other parts of the world more and more. Secondly, the daily hassle of retailers of managing interfaces of all the different players in the ecosystem basically is not to be underestimated, and we got that feedback from many customers that there would be a great wish to simplify that. Thirdly, that's also something, Dimitris, that you were shortly touching upon. There is some, don't want to say misalignments, but the incentives also at our customers' sides, they are not always completely aligned on how to select, design, and also run the systems, because there's, by definition, there's limited investment budgets. There might be ESG say motives that are playing in there, and then also, of course, with the moment that you speak about servicing equipment, there's also different incentives depending on how you get paid and what your interests are. Both within the customer, but then also within the ecosystem that we see in the markets today. The last point, why we have developed this model is that, as I touched upon earlier, the CO2 refrigeration systems, they are by tendency much more complex than some of the more traditional HFC-based refrigeration systems, and some customers they see themselves subscale to build that technological expertise, right? So they really want a partner that takes full responsibility with the right expertise. that is say the starting point for us. Okay, let's develop that solution. But when we decided that, I think for Danfoss especially, as we have been a successful component manufacturer and working in an ecosystem of distributors, of OEMs, with service companies, what we always ask ourselves is, where do we add the value in that ecosystem? So the way that we do it at Danfoss is that we have developed some tools, and some of them have been inspired by some of the frameworks by BASE or also ASG, to really think about what is the value that we provide, the extra value, and not only what is the delivery model, or say on financing, number one. And then secondly, are we as Danfoss, in what position are we to take what role in a servitized solution, right? Are we rather a partner for someone else offering that full solution? Are we taking the responsibility ourselves? Who do we need to work with in order to unlock that value? And refrigeration as a service and food theater has passed these gates basically. Then what was the outcome of that evaluation? The evaluation was that we as Danfoss, we see ourselves that we provide very strong control systems and a digital platform to manage food retail stores. And at the same time, what we are not, and what is not our business model, is actually project management and service operations of systems. That's why we have partnered up with a company called Aneo that is really complementing us on that end. They are doing the daily business, while we are providing basically that infrastructure to unlock and to enable a fully servitized model. And in a bit more in detail, the offering, it basically contains all the different elements that Parikshit and Dimitris you were pointing out. So it starts really with taking the customer needs. Are you retrofitting, or do you want to build new stores? Starting from basically the idea, supporting with partners as well, with more experts on designing, engineering the system, specifying it, procuring it. Then going into the also overseeing the installation and commissioning, and then from the day of commissioning, take over full responsibility for running the stores, which on the one hand, the most important thing in food retail is of course the food safety, that everything is running smooth and the temperatures are kept. But then the differentiating factor is also that we modify the systems, that we tweak the systems to the largest extent to run them as efficiently as possible. The offering also contains a financing element. I'll get to it in a minute, how we deal with that. And then we also have the option of giving a performance guarantee, which then also comes back to how do we do the contracts, and what do we include and what do we not include. Aneo and Danfoss, we are not providing this completely on our own, but in the markets that we are active, we are working with partners on financing. We are working with contractors doing the service with us. We are of course working with OEMs, with field service companies. In order to have that and unlock that full value for the customers. And that's of course for a classical component manufacturer as Danfoss also a big change internally to embrace this ecosystem thinking, and providing something that goes beyond components and subsystems. So much on the offering. Let's go a bit into the learnings and reflections. That was too much. No, we're on the right slide. I wrote down four points here. What we have learned, and this is not at all scientific, but this is really from practice. The one thing that I can only underline is what Parikshit said. I mean, we need to have a compelling value add story and also proof to the customers which goes beyond we finance your equipment, right? Because that bank on its own can do much better, right? And most of the customers would find also alternative ways of financing the equipment. For us, it's really the efficiency of the entire system that is in many cases not given, that we say, okay, we improve that and take a share of that improvement that we bring to the customer. Secondly, I said one size fits one. Servitization in cooling and in food retail, it's not a really mature model yet. So it's not that we could say, okay, we have 3 things to choose from and a full menu and that's what you get. But customer needs are super diverse, right? Customer motivations behind going into such a solution are also very diverse. So we really try to tailor it to the specific customers, similar as you saw in the projects that Dimitris was showing, where it was also very project-based contracts, basically. Thirdly, it's a bit simplified, but too strong of a message. I say tech is simple, master the financials. What I mean with that is that actually proving the value on the technical side and on the efficiency side has from our perspective been easier than getting the customers move into a different business model. Why? Because it's changing a lot, of course, the way that risks are allocated, but then also the way that the balance sheet, the P&L of the customers look like. And when I say master the financials, what we of course need to ensure is the moment that we speak to the financial persons at the customers, a bit Danfoss biased again, we also need to be on par on how the financial model runs, and we can't just come with our technical expertise. Then the last part here is I called it ESG, and only one aspect of that is there is a lot of green money out there that wants to be invested, and this pays then into the financial piece. How do we finance our solutions? We are doing this with financial partners, and we are seeing that there's lots of interest from financial institutions, depending, of course, on the amount of investments that we bring. And I think we're coming to a critical mass where we're becoming more interesting also for other types of investors than at the seed phase, basically. There's a lot of money to be invested, and this is actually for us also the next thing to build into that model, that we leverage on that on getting good financial terms for our customers. Then the last part, Parikshit, on contracting and pricing. Again, very, very practical. What we have learned is we can come up with most sophisticated and most detailed and very, very accurate models, but the amount of hurdles or thresholds that the customer also needs to step over is already large enough with doing that model. So we said we go for as simple as possible. That means that we do include performance guarantees. We can also do like super specific baselining and so on. But actually, from the practice, we see that this is also too much for the customer, because it's also not easy for them to actually then also reflect that in their systems, in their processes. So we really are in a stage where we say, let's listen to the customer and let's make it as simple as possible, because the simplicity aspect is one of the core elements also of our value proposition. I think, Parikshit, you already sent me that message that it's time to end. I'm very happy to take more questions and start a discussion.
Of course. Thanks a lot, Jonas, and thanks a lot, Dimitris. Both of you had very great insights, and I myself have about 2 pages of questions for both of you, but I don't want to steal the show. We have a lot of people waiting to ask questions. Ian, would you like to start? I think you had the first one.
I did. Just to kick us off, Parikshit, we've got a number in the Q&A functions, so thank you for these. Dimitri, looking at your curve over time in the adoption of X as a service, cooling seems to have a lot more case study material and research in the market. You know, the base group, you've been doing this for 10+ years or so in different South American and African markets. What lessons could you take or share from the cooling as a service that would be appropriate for heating as a service?
Very good question. I think one of the aspects is what Jonas mentioned earlier as well, like to try and keep the contract and the pricing offering as simple as possible to the customer. So that allows for better transparency to the end customer. Second, it's deploying cooling as a service, especially at the beginning. It's a partnership with the customer. So don't look for customers that are over complex and are asking like way too many kind of critical questions and clauses in the contract and are super picky. Typically, that would be the customers also that are more, let's say, difficult to engage. Of course, every profile is good. I don't want to be critical towards. I myself sometimes are difficult to change, let's say. But for the first customers, is really to have a client that trusts you as a supplier and that goes into this journey together with you. And then lastly, I would say, especially now with heating as a service, we're in the situation actually that the market is booming. The energy prices are on a rise in Europe, so it's actually a perfect wave to go onto. And it's also crossing with the fact that technologies are becoming quite complex for customers. So from an expertise perspective, it's you focus on the value that you bring to the customer. And I liked also what Jonas mentioned there. It's really like, don't focus on how this is being financed for your clients, but focus on the value that you bring to your client with such a contract.
That's a great point, Dimitri. Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Parikshit now, just to manage the Q&A, and then I'll bring the background, Parikshit.
Thanks, Ian. Jonas, a question and a comment. I would like to take a question that Ulrich mentioned, has brought up, and it's very relevant. I was going to ask exactly the same, but a comment to start with. That slide you had, do the right thing, is absolutely hitting the spot. That is something we see with the many businesses that we're working with. Often businesses struggle with that part of identifying what value do you really add to the customer beyond just taking away the financial pain. And as you said, banks could do it better, and you would get into a fight of not who is the cheapest supplier, but who's the easiest or the lowest interest rate supplier. And it's the same conversation after that. But the slide of do the right thing was excellent. And after that, you showed this slide about the cooling as a service as an annual solution powered by Danfoss. That makes a big statement, and it is something many businesses struggle with, to say this is not our solution, we want to power this solution. And Ulrich has asked the same. Does Anio offer the cooling as a service using Danfoss components, or does Danfoss somehow also get involved in financing, servicing, and installation? So I think if you could untie or untangle the relationship here.
Yeah, it's hopefully straightforward. So as said, we are complementing each other, right? And the operations part, which is also the one that the customer sees most, is provided by Aneo. That's why it's also Aneo powered by Danfoss. Aneo, however, they are very much relying on our infrastructure in the stores, right? Our control system, our digital platform, also our optimization services that we are able to develop. So that's why we're providing it together. The operational day-to-day delivery comes from Aneo.
Excellent, thank you.
And we're really happy. We're really happy to go more into these partnership models. I think some of the classical value chains with like super clear actors and defined interfaces, this time is, well, to some extent over, right? At least in some cases, it makes more sense to partner up rather than trying to separate things that can be optimized when going together.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we see with many other industries as well, where the value network is more and more complex, and you aren't immediately close to the end consumer, and you are supplying some essential components, but there are other players in the game as well. You have to fight your battles in a way and find the right partner to work with in order to achieve the final outcome. And this is something some that are attending today will also find quite, they will resonate with it. There's a question from Dawi. Hi, Dawi, by the way. I think Dimitris presented the slide on energy partners, so hi to Dawi. He asked, what risk does Danfoss take on the performance guarantee? Are you responsible for the cost of electricity or something else? Could you tell us a bit more?
Sure, and I just answered. I don't know who that goes to, whether it's only Davi, but then let's take that also in the bigger round. Aneo is actually has also an energy supply arm, basically, right? So within our partnership, we are also ready to cover the electricity costs. However, what we see is that as of today, many customers seem to have contracts in place. They also say, okay, we can maybe even do it better. So again, as I said, or I tried to say earlier, we try to minimize also the steps that the customer needs to take. And if it's another hurdle to say, now we transfer also the electricity price risk basically to our provider, then we are fine to not take it. Of course, on the other hand, or the downside of that is, as the systems are getting more integrated, as we have solar PV, as we might have heat pumps fluctuating electricity prices, there is another level of value that we can unlock if we integrate it, right? By running the systems according also to the prices. But so far, our performance guarantee is mostly based on the consumption and the efficiency of running the systems. The cost.
Thank you. Question for Dimitris next. I think, Dimitris, you flagged it as something you would answer live as well, but Ulrich at the very beginning asked about the data you mentioned of 2.4 billion or trillion US dollars to be invested by 2050. Maybe perhaps offline we can share the source of this data as well, and if some of the reports are there. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. By mistake, I wrote, I clicked on answer live instead of writing the answer, but I wrote it in the chat. So
okay, perfect.
There.
And another question then from Matt, that speaking about pricing, what are the other subsegments below energy as a service or cooling as a service? Do you see a lower level of offering as well, or is it straight to pay-per-use, paper parts? I guess, Dimitris, from the experience of your previous business models, anything you could share on different levels of offering?
Yes, I think there it's very much connected also to the staircase you shared earlier, Parikshit. So it's if you have solutions on the digital front that you can provide to customers to build that trust on measuring efficiency of the equipment, and then step by step embrace kind of the customer to move towards a full as a service offering, that's definitely a path to go, I would say. And often what I receive as questions is also, is a pay-per-use kind of can it be a renting model? Yes, but like you showed also, Parikshit, in your first slides, it's different if you provide something on how many hours you're keeping it in your backyard and actually how much usage you're doing from it. So the pricing is quite different, and also the opportunity on energy efficiency is very much different on depending on how you price it to your end customer, and also again the value you bring to your client.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dimitris. I'm conscious of time, so I would like to ask both of you one final question. You have shown us you've been through refrigeration as a service, and Dimitris, you've been through several as a service models today. One piece of advice, if you would give an equipment manufacturer or a product-led business, is this the right thing to do, or is this too scary?
Jonas, I'll let you answer first.
You mean would I do it again?
Yeah, would you do it again?
Yes, I think the moment that you are interested in innovating and also taking the challenges of transforming classical businesses and business models, absolutely. And I would like to, for the third time now, come to this: do the right thing. Find out what position you want to play, right? What your position and your partner's positions are, and then definitely we see a momentum. But I think Dimitris has a more comprehensive view, even.
Dimitris?
No, I completely agree, and I think that's the right approach as well. I think the important part is to stay curious, to see how markets are evolving, And of course, changes are scary, and risks are, I mean, without risks, you don't get more interesting returns. So here also a point that we didn't mention is that actually the returns of the companies jumping into this are very interesting and more interesting than actually selling assets. So it's also from a risk perspective of market. So it's if you do it well, it's really a win-win for your client and as well yourself. So it's looking into growing, let's say, economical value without, let's say, constantly thinking about how much more material do you need to sell. So it's an interesting aspect to link it.
Okay, I will just use this opportunity now, Dimitri, to thank yourself and Jonas and Partnership and Christina behind the scenes for all your time and effort get into today. And thank you everyone from the 26 countries that we've managed to get registered for today. You will get a copy of the recording. And thanks again, keep an eye out for the next ones, and have a good afternoon, good evening, or good morning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.